Okay. Do you mind if I vape here and there? You're not going to, you know.
You're quite all right.
All
Whatever
right.
you, however you feel comfortable, man. It's you and me
Okay,
sitting down
cool.
talking. Tapes
Let me
rolling.
fill my coffee, okay?
Get your coffee and get comfortable, brother.
Yeah. No, I'm good. You know, I'm fresh. I just woke up, you know, had good dreams, slept in, you know, which I don't get to do. You know, I don't get to do that, you know, once a week if I'm lucky. So I make up for my, you know, waking up every day at 4:35 a.m., you know, once a week, you know, and get 8 to 10 hours of sleep. You know?
You get that much?
Yeah, I get my old
a
5
week?
hours, you know.
That much a week? Wow, you're ahead of the game.
I know. I don't know how you do it. Anyway.
Okay, so today is June 16th, and here I am on Skype with my good friend and Southern California MUFON field investigator, Earl Anderson, known to most of you out there as Earl Grey. And that's how we'll refer to him from now on. It's just Earl, actually. And
I answered all the above, you know.
Absolutely. The subject of today's interview is quite fascinating. It's about Earl's mother, despite what my parrot Monty's trying to tell you.
Yeah, hello, Monty.
I don't know if he's coming over loud and clear or not. Perhaps it's time for his nap. He sounds cranky right now. Anyway, Earl, why don't you go ahead and start off? The first question, of course, I have for this is your mother's name, when she was born, and then you can start talking from there, and I'll come up with questions. I don't want to interrupt you a lot, but just a little bit of background to start about your mother and who she was.
Sure. My mom she was born Betty Grace Maiden. She was born in Muscatine, Iowa. She had grown up there. She was born in 1924, I think it was 24. Long time ago. She passed away back in 1999 of the sixth cancer. She'd had cancer, 6 bouts with it. Unrelated cases of cancer, like she had been exposed to something strange. But while growing up, I heard very strange stories from my mom. That was when I was very young. From some of the earliest memories I have, it would be from like age 4 on, up to maybe age 10, 4th grade. It stopped. She stopped talking. But she claimed that she had worked for Howard Hughes Aircraft, the Hollywood office. That it was herself, and there was one other woman. He had 2 private secretaries. My mom was one of the 2. Howard Hughes didn't have a whole lot of personal connection with them, except it was a lot of talk, a lot of conversations over the little speaker systems that they had set up. So she had her office, he had his office, and the other secretary had her office. And he sent my mom on his bidding to a lot of different things. Apparently, he trusted my mom's intuition. My mom was very, very adept at taking shorthand. She was like a champion of shorthand, and she was a spelling champion.
What was her name again?
Betty Grace Anderson.
There we go. Okay, thank you.
That was her married name after she married my dad back in 1958. Her maiden name when she worked for Hughes was Betty Grace Maiden. Which you can imagine. People ask, what's your mother's maiden name?
Yes.
Maiden, you know.
Yes.
It was.
No, her maiden name. Yes, that's it.
I know. Who's on first? It's a perfect example. Talk about Monty. It's kind of Python-esque, you know, but it was Maiden, was her maiden name. So, but anyway, my mom claimed while I was growing up that she worked in deep underground military bases. That she said that she would go in a Otis elevator, and she said those words. It was just an Otis elevator like you find in a skyscraper. And it worked just like it would in a skyscraper, except it was in the middle of the desert, and it went down. And she said it went down and down And it kept going down. She said that it was a mile underneath the desert. And she said that they had a little city down there. She said that there were people that lived down there, that they didn't come up very often, that they were working on very esoteric, secretive things, a mile under the desert, and that they had little cafes down there. She mentioned a cafe. She said it was funny because they had umbrellas over the little cafe tables, like an outdoor French cafe, little yellow umbrellas. She actually mentioned the color. That they had a bowling alley, that they had a place. She had a guy who actually would do her hair down there. That movie theater, bowling alley, that they got around in little golf carts. And she said that, and we're talking 1950, back mid-1950s to 1958 was when she stopped working there, right before I was born. My dad didn't like to, well, anyway, I'll keep on going. Dad didn't talk about it too much. I think it kind of bothered him. He wound up becoming a landscaper after a heart-lung machine business that he had kind of went under because somebody outdid him and created a heart-lung machine that it was disposable. So my dad lost a lot of money and his means to make money. And I think my mom wound up, when she married my dad, she thought that she would be, taken care of. And later on, she found out that it wasn't that way. So my mom had I think that there was she had certain regrets that she had left her old life because it was exciting. She knew Werner von Braun. She spoke about this sporadically while I was growing up. I heard different stories. They weren't connected. It's like she would be in reverie and then she would start talking about stuff. She said on many occasions, when the first time I heard it from my mom, my aunt came over. I was maybe 8 years old, 7 years old, 8, right around there. My aunt came over. She had a magazine article about the Betty and Barney Hill abduction case. It was a Life magazine, I believe. And my aunt knew about my mom's work, with the top secret stuff that was going on under there, and with Werner von Braun, etc. I'd heard them talking about it before. So she brought the magazine article over. And my cousins and I were playing outside. We were playing Lost in Space, actually. I remember, it was Christmas time. It was around Christmas time, and I got like a little wind-up monster, and we were out there. At the same time, my aunt and my mom were talking in the kitchen, and the conversation started getting very heated. So my oldest cousin, Brad's like, it's like, see what they're talking. They're arguing about something, And they were arguing about that magazine article. And I'll remember to this day, my mom saying, I think that it's real, Betty. I think that this really happened. And she's going, how could that happen? How could we not know about this stuff, in the general public? How could we not know? And that's crazy. That's like a bad movie. And my mom was saying, well, it is like a bad movie, but there's some weird stuff going on, and there, life in space is a real thing. It's a real thing, And this sounds like it could be real to me. And this is the first time in my life that I remember getting the willies. I was standing out there, and I had this strange feeling come over me, like waves of strangeness. Just, my universe had kind of expanded right there because my own mom had said that, she had worked with government authorities. She had top secret clearance that she kept. So the day she died, she kept her top secret clearance. She used it. But she would, going back a little bit, she would talk about there being, that we know that there's alien life out there. That she talked about working in the underground bases a few times when I was little. I started talking about it at school when I was in 4th grade, and the teachers actually got hold of my mom. And they thought I was crazy. It's kind of like, what do your parents do, And I was talking about it, it's what I'd heard, And well, my dad's a landscaper, but my mom's a housewife. My mom used to do such and such, and
Right.
and so the teachers were getting concerned. And I actually started. I had taken out a UFO book from the school library in 4th grade. Right. It was I believe it was the one. There were 2 authors. It was around 1968, I guess. I think that half of it was Adamski, and was there a joint Adamski and Kehoe book? I'm not sure, but I had a UFO book, and my dad was quite peeved about it, and he started saying, "Oh, this guy just made these things up. That's not real. The Adamski flying saucer," and he might have been right. That's still questionable, very questionable. But he was concerned, and my mom was just kind of horrified that I'd opened my mouth up and started talking about this stuff to teachers. Anyway, the UFO books disappeared from the school library. There were no more. They weren't there anymore. And my mom kind of did a little, pep talk with me, and she said, "Well, Earl, I shouldn't have really told you any of that stuff. I never told you. I mean, I just talked with you about it. I didn't think you'd remember. You're a little boy, I haven't talked with you about it in many years." She said, "I'm surprised that you remembered it, but I'm not really supposed to talk about that stuff. It's something we're not supposed to talk about." And she stopped talking about it. I didn't hear about it and I hadn't heard about it for a while when I was in the 4th grade. It'd been a couple years. She kind of quieted down on it as I got a little older. Going forward a bit, when I was a smarmy-mouthed teenager, I started bugging her. I wanted to know more.
Of course.
And so I'd take my mom to see movies. Was one way I'd do it. I took her to see Star Wars first, and it worked. It got her to talk a little bit more. She said, after we saw the movie, she said, "Well, son, the life in space is realer than you will ever know." She said, "Intelligent life in outer space is realer than you will ever know." She said, "Star Wars isn't that far-fetched. It's not that far-fetched at all." And then she stopped talking again. That was my little information bite I got out of Star Wars. So a few years goes by, and you have to understand now, I was kind of a little, I'd been kind of a rowdy teenager, and I cleaned my act up at age 16. So I was kind of a church mouse. I was going to Bible studies and stuff. So, I mean, the whole UFO thing didn't really fit in with my own personal philosophy, but I wanted to hear what my mom had to say.
Well, of course.
Growing up around that, So I took her to see E.T. E.T. came out. What was it, 1982? It was, a few years, 5 years later or something. And we saw that, and this time I said, "So what did you think of that, Mom?" And she said, "Well, it was a cute movie, but I don't think that they're all that nice. So, I don't think they're all that nice. A cute movie, not that nice."
Absolutely. And she's not the first person to make that comment, so.
Yeah. Yeah, apparently they don't smell that nice. She didn't say that.
One of my favorite things I like to tell people is it's not all Reese's Pieces.
No, it's not all Reese's Pieces. Apparently not. Apparently we are the Reese's Pieces sometimes.
Sometimes.
Yeah, depending on what UFO you were chasing in your fighting jet, you did. But the last time that my mom spoke about it, well, it wasn't the last time, but was about I was in my 20s, maybe age 24, around there. I started picking again. I wanted to learn a little bit more, and I just asked my mom outright. I said, "Mom, come on. Tell me what exactly were you guys doing under the desert, and tell me more about. I want to know about aliens. Is there any connection? Was there some connection between this stuff? And I mean, you talked about this stuff, but she just got mad and she walked away. And she just threw her hands up. She walked away. She didn't even at this point. She didn't even say, "I can't talk about it." I mean, it was sort of like the room was empty air, and I don't even need to say it to you. You already know I can't talk about it. She turns around, she starts walking. I remember it was click, 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 click. Her shoes, she hits the carpet of the entry hall of my parents' old house. She gets about halfway to her room and she stops and she turns around. She comes back and she has a little, see if I can do it, like a half grin, wicked grin. She says, I'll tell you one thing. I will tell you one thing. She said, you were down there. And I'm sitting there and I'm kind of like, what, huh? She said, you were down there. I said, what do you mean I was down there? She said, the last time that I went down under the desert to the little city down there, I was pregnant with you. It was 1958. The last time I went. And so you were there too. You were in my tummy. She wouldn't say in utero, but she said you were in my tummy. And you went down there as well. She smiled and she kind of, and that was all she wrote pretty much. Later on in her life, I mean, she, I didn't bring it up anymore. I mean, that kind of freaked me out. It freaked me out a bit. The next time I really brought it up to her was when she was dying of cancer she had gotten cancer a few times. First time when she was in her 30s, late 30s. She just kept getting cancers, all unrelated. It hadn't gone to her lymph nodes or anything. And the last, my dad and I had talked a bit about it, that maybe Mom had been exposed to something dangerous in her work, and she'd kept working. Now, this is another thing, too. I have to go back a little bit. I think that the reason why she talked about what she talked about when I was little was, first of all, because she didn't think I would remember it. I was just a little kid. Well, I remember everything. My first memories are when I was 3 years old, and they're distinct memories. So, but she probably thought that I'd forget about it. And so I was a safe person to talk to and tell her stories to. And I think that she thought she was done with it. But back in the 70s, she started working at a temporary employment agency, Manpower, in Thousand Oaks, California, where we lived. And she started getting scientists for the major aerospace companies that were out there. And it just kind of rolled up and ramped up on her until that seemed to be all she was doing was, what she told me, and she said in so many words, she said, I am a headhunter. She said, that's what I do. I'm a headhunter for Lockheed. I am a headhunter for, and she was getting people into the esoteric projects. That was her words as well. She said, there are esoteric projects. Some of them are very secretive. And what they're looking for are geniuses, more or less. And unschooled geniuses are the best. If they're young, unschooled, self-taught, they have gifted people. I knew one kid that she got working for Northrop. And this was back in about 1978. His name was Robert Coombs. His mom had been my math teacher in grade school, which is a whole other story, but unrelated, weird story. But my mom knew that he was a math whiz, that he could calculate stuff in his head like a computer. And she hooked him up, and he told me, she didn't say it, he told me, your mom hooked me up with Northrop. Because they're having some problems with one of their jobs that they're doing, and they couldn't figure out what was wrong. And he brought in this ream of computer papers, like the old school, where it's the green and the white paper,
right,
and they're like little perforated edges. Right.
I remember those.
With numbers, just columns of numbers.
They used to have our grades on them back in the day.
Matrix,
yeah.
But it's all on paper. And he had it in a manila envelope, and he brought it out. He had it in his closet, right? It's top secret shit. He brought it out. Now, he must have been 17 years old at the time. And he said, this is their problem. And he's going through all the pages, and he had this one number circled with a red grease pen, right? And everything was pencil erasures around it and stuff. He said this was their problem right here. They screwed this up, and I figured out what was wrong. I think I'm going to be doing more work for them. And that's the one person that I know that my mom got working for one of these companies. But it was during the period of Ben Rich in the 90s that she was working. She was still working for them she quit working for Manpower, but she was still working as a private agent with these companies. The phone would ring every once in a while. You'd see her taking shorthand notes. It was always in shorthand, by the way. You couldn't read.
Great way not to decipher stuff, yeah.
I couldn't read it. Yeah, I couldn't read it.
These days we do that with cursive and the kids don't get it. Yeah,
exactly.
Protect your documents, write in cursive.
Yeah. Well, she was good at shorthand. I mean, she was a whiz at it. Just like my friend was a math whiz. My friend at one point disappeared, by the way. And they couldn't find him for about 6-7 months, longer than that. His mom couldn't find him. His mom called me up because I'd been her old math student. She failed, actually. And it must have been difficult for her to get me on the phone. She wanted to know where her son was. And I said, I don't know. And she said, well, your mom, I think your mom got him out to work, didn't she? And I said, well, but I didn't have anything to do with it. And I don't know where he is. I asked my mom. She didn't know where he was. Months later, he came back and he claimed he'd been working on secret projects, but he told his mom that he had been in a monastery somewhere. Monks care of him, well, I don't know which was the true story. I don't know. I have no idea. But I do know that my mom kept on getting, she called herself a headhunter back in the 90s. This is what she told me. Because I told her that a friend of mine was working as a headhunter, and she said, that's what I do. Said, I'm a headhunter, And she screened the scientists because she could tell if somebody was lying or not. She had very good instincts, apparently. She had that background with Hughes, and she already had secret clearance. My mother-in-law, about 1996, contacted me, and she was my ex-mother-in-law by then, by the way. My ex-mother-in-law, who I was in pretty good terms with. But she said, hey, your mom has secret clearance, doesn't she? My daughter told me that you told her that she had secret clearance and that she had done some governmental work, secret work and stuff. I want to work for the FBI. You have to have secret clearance. You have to have a foot in the door. Do you think your mom could do anything for me? And I told her, I said, well, Pat, I don't know. I have no idea. I know that my mom still works with some of this stuff. I don't know if her secret clearance is even still in effect. I really don't know. But just call her up. Here's her phone number. Call her up and ask her, So I remember at the time, I happened to be over at my parents' house. And the phone rang, and my mom picked it up. It was Pat Krause, my ex-mother-in-law, and they were being real friendly and talking for a long time. And I should give you the background on Pat. Her husband designed the lunar module retro rockets, so she had an interest in that sort of thing. He'd gone to Princeton. So anyhow, my mom talked with her, and she said, yes, indeed, I can get you secret clearance. She got off the phone, and immediately my mom made another phone call, and I could just hear her talking. I didn't know who it was to, but she was talking with somebody that she was familiar with, and she mentioned Pat Krause. She mentioned that she wanted a secret clearance, wanted a job with the FBI. And with one phone call, the next thing I know, Pat calls me up and says, thank you very much, Earl. Your mom did that for me. I'm actually working for the FBI right now. In fact, I read the Warren report yesterday. It was before that had been released. She said, I think it was one gunman.
Nice.
Quote unquote. And that's before that was, out there in the public, She said, I really think I think the conspiracy theories aren't true. It was one lone gunman. It's a crazy man. Because I read the report, I read the secret report. So, and she just, my ex-mother-in-law just recently retired from the FBI. She worked for him for a while, And that was my mother's doing with one single phone call. And that really, it raised my eyebrows up a bit. What the fuck? What the hell? How do you make one phone call and get somebody secret clearance and get somebody working with the FBI? It's like, what the hell is my mom, engaged in here? Yeah. But she kept on doing her work for Lockheed, she said, and she worked for Rockwell, for Northrop, mostly Lockheed. And, I'm guessing it must have been Lockheed Skunk Works. Who else wants undocumented genius? And that would explain Lazar, too. I mean, maybe his whole thing about going to Caltech was bullshit. He was embarrassed because he was self-taught. Who knows? I just know that Robert Coombs, my friend from grade school, that he was working for Northrop, working on classified stuff, and he was 17 years old. He hadn't been to a university. He just had a gift. So, and he didn't know any of the nomenclature lingo. He was a 17-year-old kid. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Anyway, my mom, when she was dying of cancer, at this point, it was a couple of about 5 years after she'd gotten her job with the FBI. And I tried to talk my mom. I sat down with her and I brought up the subject. I said, Mom, you've talked about working in deep underground labs all your life. I know about it. I know about your connect. You talked about Werner von Braun, all this stuff. You've had cancer. This is the 6th time, and this time it's probably going to kill you, Mom. I mean, they pretty much, they told her she could go into hospice care, and she didn't want to. She wanted to stay at home as a nurse. So I moved in there. I was taking care of her at the time. It's 1999, and I tried to get her to lawyer up. But those were words I said. I said, Mom, you need to lawyer up. You need to get to a good lawyer, and you need to go out and you need to expose these people because they exposed you to deadly stuff, and they didn't compensate you very well. My mom, the way that now we were never rich. We were never rich. My mom had, strangely, every single year from about like the late 1970s until the mid-1990s, she would go to England for 3 months. She went there every single summer. Her flat would be bought and paid for, and she took a 3-month vacation in the UK. She had friends out there. My uncle would go. He was an antique dealer. But it was very expensive. And my dad was a landscaper. My mom, was doing her little private dealings on the phone, which she didn't really talk about, with the aerospace companies as a headhunter. But anyway, when she was dying of cancer, I really tried to get her to come out, disclose, open up, and I wanted to go after the government. I thought, a trip to England every year is nice, but it's not worth your life. And my mom was a relatively young woman. She was 74 when she finally died, and this was her 6th bout with cancer. And she wouldn't hear of it. She said, "Son, I'm very proud of what I did." And it's like, no, I'd never do that. I'd never do that. I was doing my duty, just like somebody would be doing if they joined the armed forces. It was important what we did, and I'm proud of what I did. And I've had a good life. And she passed away like a month after that conversation. Passed away in her sleep. But that's my mom's strange life and what I grew up around. And, people wonder why I'm into UFOs and, joined MUFON as a field investigator. That's what I grew up around. And I knew from an early age that we were in touch with aliens. My mom had brought it up, and, she said that we were. She said that we were in touch with that. And that and piecing it together over the years, I kept that stuff. I held it close to my heart. I wanted to know. I've always been interested in that. I've always been interested in outer space. As a little kid, I would climb up on top of the wood swing set that my dad built. Right, he went and is like IKEA swing set they had back in the early '60s. Not IKEA, but you get the idea. Where,
Yeah.
they bring all the boards and everything pre-cut, and the bolts and the nuts and all that crap, and he just built it in the backyard for me. And so I would climb up to the top of that, and I got a big piece of wood, and I drew a control panel on it, nailed a couple of wings onto the sides of it. And I guess I was about 4 years old, and my dad was asking me, well, what are you doing? I'm going, help me. Come on, Dad. Come on and help me. And he helped me put this thing on top of the swing set. It was like a little spaceship. And I got up there and I was waving at the sky. I just would sit up there for hours, And Dad would, Mom and Dad, it's like, what are you doing out there? It's like, I'm waiting for the space people. I'm waving to the space people. Yeah, so that, there you go. I don't know where this interest came from, but I guess it runs in the family.
Interesting. Very good.
So that's the end of my story, Jeff. I think I maybe forgot a couple things, but that's the essence of it.
Right. Excellent. So do you know if your mother had any personal sightings of UFOs or anything like that outside of work?
She never said that she did. She told me she did. So if she did, I didn't know about it.
Yeah.
She seemed a little scared of it. She seemed a little scared of extraterrestrials. Maybe she had reason to be. I don't know.
Yeah, perhaps maybe with what she knew, she looked at them a little bit differently than some people did.
So. I mean, she was friends with Werner von Braun. That's another thing that I didn't really go into. Close friends. In fact, I think that she was a little sweet on it. She said that he called her Betty Grace by her first and middle name, like as a pet name. He'd say, "Oh, it's Betty Grace," and that he was a charming man. She said he wasn't a real Nazi. That he told her, and later on I read the same quote in another book. He told her, and I heard the story back in the '60s, that we built the rockets right, but we sent them to the wrong planet. That they landed back on Earth. He was referring to the V-2 rockets of World War II that he designed. And she said he wasn't a Nazi. He was a charming man, and he became a patriotic American. And I was very proud to know him. A very, very sweet man. And she mentioned, Oberth as well. So, I mean, these were guys that were brought over by Project Paperclip, after the war. And now, we're finding out that, Werner was, probably working in re-engineering what came down in Roswell, perhaps. That's one, I know I've read that in a couple of different, pretty well-written books. I forget whether Stanton's Corona book mentioned that or not, but I know I've read it in a few others. Corso's book, of course, which is questionable here and there, but the essence of Corso's book, I think, is true. I think that Bill Burns probably embellished it a little, a bit. Even Corso admitted that it wasn't the same book that he, was writing, that Bill Burns took it off in a different direction. But Mom was close friends with Werner von Braun, and she knew him from working with Hughes, when she was working in the secretive labs that were a mile underground.
Now, when you said out in the desert, do you know where in the desert it was that she worked?
To be honest with you, I would be lying if I told you it was in Nevada. Now, I have a friend, Kim McMillan, who recently, just synchronicity-wise, I guess, we were at a party, and I've known her for a while. We started talking. I started telling about my mom's story. The conversation just came up, and she told me that her grandfather worked in Area 51, and he called it that. Now, my mom, she just spoke of it as, a secret base in the desert, and she did not mention which desert, and I wish to God she had. But
I wonder if it was Edwards.
I don't know.
That's close enough, to have been feasible.
Yeah, I don't know. She didn't say the words Area 51.
Sure.
My friend Kim, her grandfather did use the words Area 51 and Groom Lake facility, and etc. And independent of my story, she said, because we were kind of telling each other our stories, I hadn't mentioned any details about what my mom said, and she mentioned on her own about the golf carts that they got around in. She mentioned the cafe with the umbrellas, and she mentioned the bowling alley. So, I just kind of put, two and two together, and maybe her grandfather knew my mom or had worked there. But it was the same story from a different person from the same time period.
Nice.
Yeah, I think that Kim would probably go on record with it, too. I think she would.
Be interesting to get a hold of her and put it together.
Yeah, she's a friend.
Nice.
She's a friend, but she's my friend now because we've got that connection.
Sure.
So, and I just saw her like a couple weeks ago, so I can definitely talk with
There's
her
only
about
two alternatives there. Either she was her relative was at the same place, or it's the standard decor for deep underground military bases.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I imagine they would repeat themselves. I mean, they would repeat
Having
themselves.
been in the military, it sounds like a familiar pattern, yes. They do have standard military colors and standard ways of doing things, so you never know.
Well, it was, obviously you don't need umbrellas a mile under the desert.
No, that was more for the psychological morale and, the feeling of, being up there with the rest of the people instead of stuck underground. For some people, who knows, maybe they might have been under there for months at a time.
Yeah.
Do you know if your mom ever had anything to do with the Hughes Airport in Las Vegas?
That I don't know.
Because, my parents used to own property across the street from that, McCarran Field. And, of course, that's where Howard Hughes always used to fly out of. And it's also, coincidentally, where Janet Air flies out of to Area 51.
My mom did know about that place. I have a feeling. But she never mentioned it. She was... Now, you have to remember, she was talking to her little toddler, and later on, just her little son, who is, up to about age 8, about stuff that she just really didn't think I was going to really remember or care about later on. So she had, and plus I don't think that she thought she was going to start working using her secret clearance again, as it goes. She retained her secret clearance to the end. So she didn't have loose lips, and it's pretty. I think it's pretty unusual information that I have, that she made that one mistake in her life.
Did she ever talk about Howard Hughes much?
Huh?
Did she ever talk about Howard Hughes much?
Yeah, she did. She had some funny stories about him. She knew that he was pretty paranoid, pretty crazy. She only saw him a couple of times. One of those times he was walking down the hallway. I mean, she was Chaplin-esque the way she explained it. She had opened her door, and apparently Hughes, because he would want to go out of the facility before other people saw him. He had his own little, he would leave first. But one time he was still walking down the hallway when my mom opened up the door from her cubicle and started walking down the hallway out to the parking lot. And she said there he was. He was walking out, and he had like his little hat, and he had his briefcase, and it was Howard Hughes, and he was walking right out. But she apparently didn't have a whole lot of contact with him. Nobody did. Nobody did. He would send other people to do his business for him when he could, because at this point, he was paranoid of people. He didn't want contact, and maybe who knows? I mean, now I think maybe he had reason to be paranoid. I don't think that he thought they were very nice either. My mom got that attitude somewhere. She talked with him a lot on their intercom system. She was in the cubicle next to his, or the room next to his, and that's how they would communicate every day. He wanted the See's candy fudge recipe, And he gave my mom that. She used to tell it because it was so funny. That he was paranoid to eat See's candy, but he loved their fudge. So he had my mom contact them. And he said, "Price is no object. I will pay whatever they want. I want that damned recipe so I can have my people make that fudge for me, and I don't have to worry about it." So my mom has, and I still have the See's candy fudge recipe. It's in our little recipe thing that I kept from our old house. But my mom got that for Howard Hughes. And she just said he was just very strange, very weird, very paranoid. That was her word for him. He was just paranoid. He didn't like people very much, but he did what he did, and so there's a couple of stories about Hughes for you.
Nice. So when he passed and there was all the different controversies, did she have any take on anything there? Or because it's my feeling that a lot of the money, since there were so many people trying to make a grab for it and nobody you ever heard of anyone actually succeeding, it's my take that a lot of it ended up still going right back into the defense industry and Hughes Aircraft, and perhaps maybe even some seeding of the black budget that we are always wondering about for unacknowledged special access programs and things along that vein. Perhaps it all went into the giant kitty that they have to promote their other businesses that we never hear about, that are so top secret they don't even get talked about under the heading of black budget.
Yeah, I imagine so. I mean, when he died, my mom really didn't have much to say about it at all. I tried to get her to talk, and she wasn't talking back then. She'd clammed up. She clammed up for many years. She talked a little bit more when she knew she was dying of cancer. We started talking about it a little bit, but she would only talk about it so much. She was real proud of what she did, and she took her security clearances very, very, very seriously.
Yes, and most people do, and we're glad to hear that. Yes.
I searched her house after she died because I'd been living there at that point. I as you know, I'm a nurse. I was taking care of her there at the end. And after she passed, and I'd gathered my feelings and my thoughts, the first thing I did was just scoured her. She was living with my dad in a mobile home at the time, and they were kind of pack rats. And there's a lot of stuff to scour through. And I was hoping I'd find a ID badge, papers, anything.
The little flashy thingy from Men in Black, yeah.
There's nothing. And strangely, a year later, my parents' mobile home burnt down. My dad was still living there, and he was getting forgetful. I remember the fire marshals were kind of gathered together trying to figure out what happened. They determined that it was the wiring, or they really didn't know what caused the fire. So I've thought sometimes that maybe our old place was gotten rid of. Maybe there was something there that I hadn't found. But who knows?
Or else someone else just was thinking, just in case, maybe make sure. Yeah.
And after all, it's just a mobile home, right? Just, this is where they live, and that's about the end. That's it. All I can think of right now.
Okay.
There's more, and if I think of more, I will tell you, Jeff.
You can shoot me an email with it or something. I'm going to stop recording for now.
All right, cool.
Thank you for taking the time to do this, Earl. I appreciate it. It'll help
pleasure.
Quite a bit with the article.
Cool.
So again, and why don't you say again before I shut this off? Well, before I shut this off, tell us again what the article, who it's going to be for, what magazine it'll be in.
It's going to be in UFO Truth magazine, which is published by Gary Hazeltine, who's a former police officer in the UK and has had his own UFO experience. And he's a very good researcher. I have utmost respect for him. And I mentioned to him also that I would like to have more information about Hughes and his involvement in all this. And if anybody else out there, maybe somebody knew my mom. My mom spent a lot of time in the UK, and that's where his magazine is. Well, it's an e-zine, but that's, it's aimed at the UK as his main audience. So I'm thinking, well, maybe somebody out there knew my mom, knew more about what she did. under the desert, and maybe somebody has more information. So he said that, I will publish your story. It's up to you. You write it, I'll publish it. And he said, we'll do it with that premise that maybe somebody knows more. So maybe somebody does.
Excellent. We'll
Yeah.
get it out there then. All right.
All right.
I'm going to shut off the recording, but I'll still talk to you here.